Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to the Black Hole. Today we are gathered here for a screening of a documentary film titled Shackled, The Tragic Life of Ghulam Abbas. This documentary film lays bare the stark realities faced by those with severe mental illness in our judicial system. This screening will be followed by a panel discussion with Dr. Mowadat Hussain Rana and Sara Belal, who will explore the critical intersection of mental health and the death penalty in the country. मैं मुख्तसर सा तारुफ करवाता जाऊँ. डॉक्टर मोअद्दत हुसैन राना is a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences. He's a member of Pakistan's National Task Force for Mental Health, and he serves as a consultant to the World Health Organization. We have Sara Belal with us as well. She's a graduate of Oxford University and Harvard Law School. Moreover, she is the executive director of Justice Project Pakistan. आप सब लोगों की आमद का शुक्रिया. रोज़ाना की तरह प्लीज़ आपको एक ही ज़हमत देनी है कि अपने सेल फोन्स जो है वो साइलेंट मोड पे कर लें, सो दैट देयर इज़ नो डिस्ट्रैक्शन व्हेन द हाउस इज़ ओपन फॉर Q&A एंड ओपन डिस्कशन. क्योंकि ये इतना अहम मौजू है, इतना अहम ह्यूमन राइट्स कंसर्न है, बोथ फ्रॉम मेंटल हेल्थ परस्पेक्टिव एंड प्रिजनर्स राइट एंगल. तो आप इस गुफ्तगू में ज़रूर शरीक होइएगा. जस्ट रेज योर हैंड फर्स्ट, ताकि आपको जो माइक्रोफोन दे दिया जाए, फिर आपकी आवाज़ जो है वो ऑनलाइन ऑडियंस तक भी जाएगी और रिकॉर्डिंग में भी अच्छी आएगी. नाउ इससे पहले कि हम ये स्क्रीनिंग शुरू करें, आई वुड लाइक टू इनवाइट Sara Belal, the Executive Director of Justice Project Pakistan, to say a few words about the documentary. Thank you.
There we go. It's on. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Prisoners' Justice Day and why we are holding this screening. So as you know, Justice Project Pakistan, I'm going to speak in English this time just because for the benefit of our guests, but I'm assuming people won't have a hard time understanding. Are we okay with me speaking English? Yeah? Okay, thank you. So Justice Project Pakistan, the organization that's screening this, is a Pakistani organization that defends Pakistani prisoners facing the harshest punishments at home and abroad. And we've been doing this work for the last 15 years. We do it by doing strategic litigation in the courts. We do it by doing policy advocacy and advising our government and dealing with international governments and international systems like the United Nations. We work very closely with the European Union, who is behind the support for this movie, in actually advocating to bring Pakistan's application of the death penalty in line with international human rights law. So a very interesting fact is that the death penalty is not actually outlawed in international human rights law. So therefore, we don't pursue an absolute, we don't talk about the work in abolitionist terms. We talk about it in the way that we have framed it, because I think that it's a framing that works better for the journey that our country is on right now. So international human rights law requires that if you are going to have the death penalty as a country, you have to practice it in line with some of the standards that have been set. And the biggest standard is the most serious crime standard. That means that you cannot be using the death penalty for non-lethal crimes such as narcotics or, Pakistan has, can anybody guess how many crimes Pakistan has that merit the death penalty? No JPPer is allowed to answer. Any takers? How many think it's 10 crimes? You can raise your hand. No one thinks we have 10 crimes? 20? Ooh, close. It's higher. Yeah, keep going. No, 25? Who thinks it's 25? We can do this all day. Okay, so it's 31 crimes that merit the death penalty. It used to be 33. We just knocked off 2. So that's a good trend. What you're going to be talking about today, what you're going to be seeing today is the story of one of our clients, Ghulam Abbas. As the title says, it is a tragic story, one that ended in tragedy, something that I think is something that I'm still coming to grips with. But I want to tell you about how we got into the work of representing clients that were severely mentally ill. So one of the first times, 15 years ago, I think this was the first time that we had formed JPP, which basically meant it was myself and another lawyer in an office. I'm not sure if we had an office or if it was my husband's guest room, but we had an office, and we had gone to Central Jail Lahore to actually go and visit one client that we had that was on death row. And while we were there, because we were dressed as lawyers in black and white, we saw it was the day that you visit families. So Thursdays are the days that you visit families, come and visit death row clients in prison. And I will never forget this, but this lady came straight up and grabbed my arm and said in Urdu, "Tum vakil ho," which means like, "You're a lawyer." And we said, "Yes, we are." And she said, "Come and meet my son now." And I said, "I'm not sure the prison authorities are going to let me just come." And it was incredible because I saw Central Jail Lahore, which is not a pleasant place. I saw this lady who at that time, must have been in her 60s, just lead me by the arm straight to the death cells and parked me in front of the cell that her son was in. And none of the guards stopped her, and I'll tell you why later on. And I'll never forget this. I look up and I'm sitting in front of a man whose face has been stitched up from here all the way down here, literally like a bad Halloween costume. And it was still swollen. And he had no idea where he was, but he recognized his mother. And she said, talk to him. And, long story short, that was Khizr Hayat. He was one of our first clients. You can see there's a whole report dedicated to him, and his picture is on that report. He was the first person that we started representing who was mentally ill. And we tried for 15 years to get Khizr moved to the Punjab Institute of Mental Health, which you're going to see in the movie today, which is less than 2 kilometers away. And 15 years, we don't do anything else at JPP. We only do these cases. We don't have other cases. And it was incredibly frustrating, despite many, many mental health evaluations, records, litigation, to not be able to move him into a facility that was right next to him, where he was meant to be, where the law said he should be. However, the journey representing Khizr has fundamentally taught us how the system works and how you work through the system and overcome it. So we weren't able to save Khizr because we did save him from execution a couple of times, but he ended up dying a couple of years ago because he developed viral encephalitis, and the symptoms for that sometimes manifest the same way as visions or hallucinations. So they didn't think he was any crazier than he was, so they didn't shift him. But he did die in the hospital after his mother came and said goodbye to him. She said, I don't want you, I can't bear for you to go back to prison. This is the only time I've seen you outside of prison. I want you to go. And that night he passed away. But you're going to see that there were good times as well. So Khizr taught us how to litigate what the systemic problems were. We realized that the judges that we were arguing this in front of didn't understand the very basics about mental illness. And so we started, with the support of some of the donors that are here, conducting mental health trainings for judicial officers. Then we realized, wait, the High Court judges don't know what we're talking about. The Supreme Court judges don't know what we're talking about. So then we made sure that we were holding seminars and conferences that were actually teaching them the basics of how the brain works and how that affects criminal culpability. And I'm really happy to say, because I believe in optimism, because things are getting better in Pakistan. They can get better if you keep at it. 2 of the justices that we had trained at the provincial high courts then sat on the bench that decided the seminal judgment, which was Safiya Bano. So it happened over 8 years, but Safiya Bano barred the execution of severely mentally ill prisoners in Pakistan. and it used international human rights law as a bar to insert that within our own law. And what you're going to see today is going to be what happened after Sofia Banu. And then the discussion that you're going to see today is going to discuss what can we do better once we've had this landmark judgment. Did things change on the ground? And what do we need to do to move forward? So without further ado, I don't want to take up more time, but I do want to introduce someone who represents a mission that has stood up for individual Pakistani lives, including Khizr Hayats, and helping us stop their executions. And to us at JPP, that means more than anything. They've also supported us over the years to do the work that we do. But at the end of the day, when we go home, when we take stock of who are our real allies, we judge them by the ones that picked up the phone and tried to stop to save even a single Pakistani life. And one of those people here is Ambassador Kionka, who recently did this for a series, for another Pakistani just last September. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. Would you like to come and say a few words?
Thank you, Sarah. It was a privilege to do that, and anytime it needs to be done, you know where to reach me. Dear colleagues, hi Leslie, the good colleague from the High Commissioner of Canada. There are other diplomats here, Professor Hoodboy, Dr. Rana, Sarah, distinguished guests, JPP staff. Good afternoon. It brings me it's a great honor, and it's a huge responsibility to be able to address you tonight on this day marking Prisoners' Justice Day. And I thank JPP for having organized this, and Professor Hoodboy for hosting us here in the Black Hole. Prisoners' Justice Day is highly significant. It originates from 1974 following the death of Edward Naylan at the Millhaven Institution in Canada, and evolved into a global day of reflection on the plight of prisoners worldwide. Prisoners' Justice Day serves as a reminder about the often overlooked violations of human rights that occur inside prison walls every day. It's an occasion to remember those who have lost their lives in jail, as well as to renew the commitment to ensuring that all prisoners are treated with humanity and respect. The European Union has consistently championed the rights of prisoners, both in Europe, where we continue to face challenges to having respectful conditions in prisons, and across the world. And our stance is clear. All prisoners, regardless of their crime or their condition, deserve to be treated with dignity and to have access to adequate health care, legal representation, and fair treatment under the law. This is in line with the global standards, such as the UN Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners, also known as the Nelson Mandela Rules. Within Europe, these have been translated into the Council of Europe's European Prison Rules. The Council of Europe has nothing to do with the European Union, but it is the kind of the preeminent human rights body in Europe. And those rules at the Council of Europe enshrine that all, and I quote, all prisoners shall be treated with respect due to their inherent dignity and value as human beings, unquote. Not unlike in some of our EU member states, the prison system in Pakistan is overburdened. The data provided in the reports launched by JPP today are alarming and point to a 152% national overcrowding rate. This indicates a grave concern for the rights of over 100,000 inmates across the country. So overcrowding of prisons not only infringes upon the basic human rights of prisoners, but it also exacerbates issues like inadequate health care, poor sanitation, and increased vulnerability to abuse. The situation for prisoners with psychosocial and mental health issues is particularly troubling, and we heard a taste of that from Sarah, and we will see it in the film. These individuals are among the most vulnerable within the prison system, often facing severe neglect and a lack of appropriate health care. The documentary that we're about to watch speaks for itself. I won't say anything more about that, but it is a stark reminder of the systemic issues within the criminal justice system and the human toll that it exacts on the most vulnerable people. But there's good news. As the judicial system in Pakistan has recognized this issue and is showing the way to encourage Pakistani prisons, the prison system, to address the need for special protections for these particular prisoners. And Sarah referred to the Safia Bano judgment by the Supreme Court. This introduced a wide range of safeguards at all stages in the justice system and directed the establishment of a forensic psychiatric facilities, ordered capacity building for relevant personnel to ensure that prisoners with psychosocial disabilities or challenges are treated with the care and the respect that they deserve. The directions of the Safia Bano judgment are clear, but now comes the hard part, the implementation. Implementation is always the hard part, and implementing those instructions is the responsibility of the federal and provincial governments, and would bring Pakistan closer to fulfilling its own domestic and international legal obligations. The EU supports Pakistan's efforts to reform its criminal justice system through our ongoing and very ambitious Deliver Justice project. We also support the vital work of civil society in encouraging that the most vulnerable in society are not forgotten. So together, and by together I mean government, the judicial system, civil society, the international community, we can work toward the full implementation of the Safia Bano judgment. It's only through collective effort, which affords some collective protection too, if I may say it quite that clearly. It's only through this way that we can ensure justice for all, uphold the dignity of every individual, and make prisoners Justice Day not just a day of remembrance, but a day of action. And to finish with a quote from another seminal judgment in the Aslam Ghaki case by the Federal Sharia Court, and I quote, "It may be legally justified for the state to detain prisoners pending execution of sentence, but there is no moral or lawful reason whatsoever to subject such a convent to humiliation and disgrace." Unquote. Thanks very much for coming out today. Thank you.
जी तो सुहेल साहब ये आप मुझे बताएं कि आप अक्सर बाय द वे जो है ना ट्रैवलिंग पे रहते हैं, इसकी क्या वजूहत हैं? मतलब कि
Thank you everyone for being here. This is the Black Hole, a community space where we look at everything that there is, social issues, scientific issues, things that concern society. And of course, what could concern society more than how it treats its prisoners and its mentally ill? Thank you, Sarah, for inviting me. I have no expertise to share with you. Just some thoughts come to mind, and perhaps we can have a conversation on that. But first, Saalik, let me congratulate you on producing a very powerful film, one that I'm sure left a very deep impact upon people who were watching here. I'm sure it must not have been easy to make. Well, the mentally disadvantaged, the mentally ill in this society are doubly disadvantaged. On the one hand, it is not understood that mental illness is just like physical illness and absolutely no different from it. It's just like something that goes wrong with your liver or your kidney or your nose or your eyes or whatever. Of course, the brain is a very special organ, but it is a physical illness. It may come from a chemical imbalance. It may come from neurotransmitters going awry, all sorts of things. Our chemistry determines what we are. On the other hand, the mentally ill are required to be responsible for their actions, and no leeway is given for the fact that it is nature which has been cruel to them. And so, should they happen to commit a crime, they must then not only bear the full consequences, but beyond full consequences. So, as we heard in the film, it's not just double jeopardy, it's triple jeopardy, it's multiple jeopardies, because you are then reviled by society, you're spat upon, you're called a lunatic. And so it's a multiple level of tragedy that's involved. But we have a long conversation ahead of us. And so let me begin with you, Sarah. Some 3 years ago, I recalled reading in the newspapers about the case of Safia Bano. And it was a very celebrated judgment because it was the first time that the death sentence had been commuted to a life sentence for someone who had committed murder. Now, my recollection of this is very hazy, but you must know the details intimately. Can you remind us of that?
So, thank you, Dr. Udbay. So, it was basically a seminal case that was pending before the court for many years. And what it was an amalgamation of several petitions that were making their way slowly up the Supreme Court until the court decided finally that they were going to create a larger bench, which means, at least 3 to 5 judges that will rule on this as a question of law. Getting to that point also took a long time because getting the Supreme Court to realize that this is a larger question of law that they have to interpret takes time. And so the way we did that was just flooding them with petitions and just waiting as they went through the system. So when they finally all gathered up there, the court made a larger bench. And in that larger bench, there were 3 petitioners. One was Imdad Ali. One was Kaniza Bibi, who was Pakistan's only woman whose sentence of death has been upheld by the Supreme Court of Pakistan previously. And the third one was Ghulam Abbas. And the court clubbed all of these 3 cases together because essentially the decision before the court, the question before the court was the same. Do these people deserve to die? Now, the reason this judgment was new on a number of fronts was this. Number one, their sentences, their guilt, and their death sentence had already been upheld by the Supreme Court of Pakistan in the regular appellate hearings. This was new, that it was a second round of litigation, which technically doesn't exist in the appellate system. So, it was going through a different route by saying, fine, we're not challenging the sentence or the court's original finding, but we've uncovered new evidence that was never presented before the court in the first round. And courts hate that. Judges hate that more than anything. They like finishing up, tying up the cases. Once it's over, it's over. You can't keep coming back again. They hate that for criminal law because otherwise it never ends, right? So But the evidence that we had uncovered was so strong, and the evidence comes from JPP's investigators, like you see Sohail going out into the field, tracking down the old witnesses, uncovering all of this stuff.
May I ask, how was it possible to get to the Supreme Court when there are thousands of cases that are pending over there, and these people don't look very influential? In fact, they look very downtrodden. So how was it possible to get the attention of the court?
That's a very, very good question. This is where Saalik and his team comes in. So at JPP, when we do strategic litigation has only half the battle, or I would even say a quarter of the battle, is before the actual court. We also have to make a case for your client, for the client that we've picked, in the court of public opinion. And without the court of public opinion on your side, without public attention on the case on your side, these cases don't actually get taken up by the Supreme Court. There's no momentum for the justices who
Perhaps Saalik could tell us a bit about that.
He wasn't there at that time. He came later. But it was the JPP communications team whose job it was to make sure that the stories of Kaniza Bibi, Ghulam Abbas, which happened at different times, and Imdad Ali, we were representing them at different times, were taken up and regularly kept within the news cycle, within the public's consciousness, and also within the judge's consciousness. So we do research on like which judge reads which newspaper, and having influential people write op-eds about these issues really gets their attention. Having the media run stories about it. We keep track of who their clerks are. Some of them were supposed to be here today, but there's a late hearing in the court. We make sure strategically that sometimes it was even holding a play, actually. On the World Day Against the Death Penalty, we hold theatrical plays in which we invite the justices' wives and their children. So there are ways, these are living beings that live within our society. So the idea is to keep the case alive within the society, to get that attention. And then sometimes even diplomatic intervention. So the previous ambassador to the European Union, when she got her credentials, they go and they present to different dignitaries. And she came across one of the senior justices, actually at that time the Chief Justice of the court, and said, Pakistan has one woman that, whose sentence has been upheld. And, we're concerned about that case. And so that got the Chief Justice's attention as well. So it's creating a perfect storm, legally, policy-wise, public awareness-wise, where the judges can't ignore.
In your introductory remarks, you said that Ambassador Kionke, who's here, had a role in stopping an execution. Now, could we have some details from you and from her, perhaps?
I think
Why not?
that's an ongoing case, so we'd want to keep it, but fair. I think what would be fair to say is that the European Union has had a very clear stance on the death penalty. And that stance comes from not a moral superiority, but it comes from their own experience of having, dispensed with the death penalty. And when they speak to us for the last 10 years, when they've advocated on behalf of Pakistani citizens not being executed, it has always come from a place of concern and value of life for that Pakistani national. And with giving us the space to determine our own path and our own journey of how we as a society are going to deal with this punishment, who we think deserves this punishment, and what kind of a system do we have in place? Is it infallible? Clearly not. That we think merits this punishment.
So,
yes, please. I don't need to speak for you, but
I just wanted to say one thing. It's not that I don't want to say what happened, but one of my very first bosses at the European Union told me that there's no limit to what you can accomplish if you are willing to let somebody else take the credit for it. I thought that was very wise advice. And sometimes in politics, if you give a little room for a face-saving response, then you can get what you want. So you can either be happy or get what you want. And I much prefer the latter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, what happened in 2021? 2021, was it? That was a moral and a legal victory. But to what extent was that translated into practice? Do we see any substantial impact of that decision?
So I think living in Pakistan, it's always exciting. One can say that. And there's always change. And I'm setting myself up for saying something disappointing, which I don't like saying, because I'm still struggling with this case. Ghulam Abbas is dead. He was one of the petitioners in Safiya Bano. The court gave him relief, shifted him to a hospital. They didn't commute his sentence because they were trying to fix another part of the system, which is Ghulam Abbas's mercy petition that had been submitted to the president was found to be faulty because it did not attach the 15, 16 years of his medical records from the prison, showing that he was mentally ill. And so the rejection of his mercy petition by the presidency was overturned by the court. And they said, you're going to do this again. So send it again with the records. They commuted the sentence for Kaniza and Imdad, but they wanted to fix the system through Ghulam Abbas, the mercy petition system. But he died waiting for the president to decide. And he died without any of the directions that the court gave to the federal or the provincial governments to establish better mental health facilities, psychiatric facilities, to have a medical board evaluate all of the death penalty, all of those on death row that were claiming to have a mental illness. We couldn't even get Ghulam Abbas examined. Saalik will tell you more about that. We couldn't get him examined. Kaniza is still behind Punjab Institute of Mental Health. We're trying to get her released. We can't get a doctor to sign off on the fact that she's getting better. Maybe I'll let Saalik speak about that. It's difficult for me still to speak about Ghulam Abbas dying because, yes, Safiya Bano was an amazing moment. It was praised by 8 UN experts, issued a joint statement praising Pakistan's judiciary. But unfortunately, I think, and I blame us as well, because I think as civil society, it's our job to keep the attention on the issue. And I think we got complacent as well. We thought a bunch of people are going to come in, and create these trainings. We created all the manuals for the trainings, but we just thought a lot more people who are better equipped from the development sector would just come in and do these trainings on a mass level, because all the federal, and we rewrote the law according to what was required by the Supreme Court judgment that almost got passed, but then the government changed. But we weren't able to, it's our fault as well. And he died, and he's our client.
Let me ask Saalik now. You interviewed the relatives of Ghulam Abbas. Were they willing to talk?
Yeah, they were. They were willing to talk. I think they were frustrated that no one had come to speak to them sort of sooner. I think at every level, being given a court-appointed attorney, not being able to get the right sort of mental health treatment, they were shown a lot of apathy. So when we came to speak to them and ask them questions about his past and their memories of him and their experience within the court system, they were more than willing to share their experience. I think it felt, at the end of it, it felt like they had released something that was sort of bogged down on them for a very long time. Yeah.
What made it look very genuine was the 2 cases of where you're asking, do you remember a good thing, a happy time with your uncle and a sad time? And he says, yes, when he brought us toys. And then when we tried to eat apple peels, got slapped. Yes, so that brings the human touch. And I'm glad you did that. What else did you experience during this filmmaking that is
I
worthy of conveying?
experienced, it was a very difficult film to make. So it was my colleague and I, Tabish, he's not here, but he also helped make the film. So we traveled to their home. It was difficult to see reminders of Ghulam Abbas in the house. They had still sort of created like this a space of remembrance for him. So that was very difficult to see because they were still dealing with this tragedy. And if you look at it, they were dealing with it for, a lifetime. Sadakat, that was Ghulam Abbas's nephew. So not only did Ghulam Abbas's mother deal with it, sisters, but also his nephew. So it was like, a generational sort of trauma. And they're still dealing with it because they're still waiting for answers. His postmortem report has still not been released. It was really difficult. I mean, there was so much apathy in every institution that dealt with this case. But I think what was hopeful was when we met Dr. Rana, we met Dr. Saad Bashir Malik. They were, people within the mental health or psychological community who were doing wonderful work. They were taking initiatives to bring change. So I think it was a little bit of both. Yeah, it made me feel really depressed and angry and sad, but at the same time, it made me feel like, okay, there are people who are putting their energy into the right place. They're sacrificing their life to try to, bring changes within the system. So yeah.
I'm going to ask you both a difficult question.
Sure.
Maybe two difficult questions. Sure. There have been some high-profile murders in Islamabad, and mental insanity has been proffered as a reason for those murders to have occurred. Yeah. How do you look at it? Would you give them the same degree of sympathy that you have given to the poorer victims? These are ultra-rich people.
Absolutely. I really wanted to do the case, but my team wouldn't let me. Because for once, I'd wanted to have somebody with a mental health record, like an actual record. And only rich people have psych records. I've never had a client with any record. It's, when they get to prison, I have to sue the prison to try to get the records. Or then I have to try to get a doctor to go and see them and get the records reviewed. To be a defense lawyer, to just have somebody with I think this gentleman was born in the United States. He had records in England. He had records coming out of everywhere. And I just thought, wow, what a change it would be to represent somebody with records. Look, the law is not there to serve us for the people that we like. The test of the law is to serve the people when we don't like, these people that we construe as monsters. And, for every one of that kind of a rich person's case, Dr. Hudboy, I can quote you hundreds of prisoners in Pakistan's prisons, thousands, who are suffering at the hands of it. But unfortunately, what we think about the law, public opinion about the law, and political will around the law is shaped by these, once in a lifetime cases. And I saw this happen with the Nawaz Sharif cases as well. Like people would say, well, we want to hold corruption. And I would say, well, I really don't get, from somebody that works in prisons and has been defending people in Pakistan's prisons who are just destitute and poor. These odd cases that you're quoting at me do not apply. And I will not speak about them because they skew public perception about what's actually the systemic problem. And I think that that case does that. Unfortunately, like the 100th prisoner that Pakistan executed after lifting the moratorium on the death penalty in the wake of the APS attack, where the government, had stated that the country was reeling from a horrific terrorist event. Many kids had died, and the government at that time used this security and failure to actually, which most governments around the world do, right? To say, we're going to go after, because we're going to look tough on crime. We're going to execute these terrorists. And they lifted the 7-year moratorium. Well, the 100th prisoner that died was Munir Hussain, who, had a family who was as ill, if not more ill than Ghulam Abbas. And he actually died while we had to stay from a court, staying his execution. But the jail and his family got together to proceed with the execution because the family was too scared to have him come out. They didn't understand that a stay of execution meant that he wasn't coming out. And, he had killed his uncle because he was a schizophrenic his whole life. And he had beaten his wife up for years and years. So they got together to say, let's just finish this because we can't risk having him come home. And we read about it in the paper the next day. And we phoned up the prison and we said, how could you do this? We have a stay order from the court. And they said, you know what? You can go and litigate this if you want. But his family wanted him gone. And I understand and I weep because I've met his children and I know what they went through. But to me, it breaks my heart to know that there was a soul that came into this world that didn't stand a chance. And the time that it was time for him to go, no one stood up for him,
But then this is a difficult moral problem because here's a man nobody wants, who's a danger to society. And for those who believe in the death penalty, it makes a lot of sense. And so should we be concerned?
Yes, because I would challenge that on two fronts. If he was a rich man, he probably wouldn't have had the illness that he had to the extent that he did. Because we know now from medical science that mental illness is genetic. It's also based on what happens to you in the womb, maternal health. All of these factors play a very big role. And then, there have been psychopaths throughout history who have led countries. Who's to say that Munir Hussain, if he wasn't born in a different scenario, couldn't have been one of those psychopaths? Wouldn't have been somebody that would have gotten the treatment. And I disagree with saying I don't value human life by who wants them. They exist as souls.
But wait, we're getting into dangerous territory. I would certainly have not allowed Hitler to live. I would have killed him.
It's interesting, and I don't mean to drag the EU into this,
yes.
But after World War II,
yes.
They had the Nuremberg trials. And a lot of Europe's policies, as a society, like I said, it's their own journey. They had to come. We have to come on our own journey to whatever conclusion we come to. But it came out of World War II and that much death and that much destruction and that much revenge to really look at the system and say, is this what we want? And is this what we think that's fair? And is this what is infallible?
My other difficult question to either of you. Yes, there are people who are on the death row because they have killed. They may have killed in anger. They may have killed for revenge. They may have killed for money or whatever. And one can have whatever views one has on who should live and who should die. But there are, to my knowledge, hundreds of people in this country on the death row who have been accused, mostly falsely, of having blasphemed. And they are not supported by society. People are terrified of taking up their case. And so they languish in jails for years and years, and many expect to die there. Have you considered looking at least at some of these cases?
Yes. So very early on in my career, those are when you're a young lawyer trying to do human rights work and get experience. Blasphemy cases were the only ones that you would get. And my joke always was I was the fourth lawyer on the case. So when the blasphemy convict had run out of every kind of money, after 3 lawyers, then they would take me. Because I would do it for no money, and those are very difficult cases. They're a different type of case. I call them Alice in Wonderland proceedings because nothing that you know of the law, none of the considerations or the rules of procedure or the law apply because of the immense political pressure that exists outside of the courtroom and how that influences what happens in the courtroom. Having said that, because this is being streamed live, I want to make it very clear that we do not work on those cases. Justice Project doesn't work on those cases anymore. We did finish the ones that we did many years ago that I did individually, but we don't work on those cases. Those are cases of concern, and I do believe they are raised at every level. On the international front, whenever Pakistan's international human rights obligations are talked about. But when we look at Pakistan's death row, which right now stands, we're about to release these stats on the World Day Against the Death Penalty, but has nearly doubled in the last 2 years. It's gone back up to its average of between 6,000 to 8,000. The actual figure, I'm going to get to you on October 10th. You're looking at people accused of murder and people sentenced to death by the anti-terrorism courts. Those are the people that are flooding, are getting sentenced to death. The most amount of sentences. I think on average with blasphemy, you have something under 20. But the majority of people are, like you said before, people who've been accused of murder and anti-terrorism courts, but those are not actually terrorists because our court anti-terrorism act is flawed. And so it's murder, it's regular murder trials that are being tried by them as well. And most of them are falsely accused. We're coming out with statistics again on the 10th that show the rate of overturning by the Supreme Court, which is under 3%. So if you're looking at a 3% rate of the Supreme Court confirming death sentences, then think about, and the second fact I'm going to tell you is Pakistan has the second largest reported death row in the world after China, right? So how many people must be getting sentenced by the trial courts for the Supreme Court to only uphold 3% of those, and still we have the second highest death row in the world. Those numbers are astounding and baffling, right? So as a society, I had a professor that came, a teacher from Texas who worked on the death penalty. And he came many years back, a decade back, and he was speaking at LUMS. And he goes, I can't understand it, Sarah. Like your country, I've been here now for 10 days and I see people and they don't trust the government. They don't pay their tax because we don't trust the government to put our money to good use to solve, for example, the electricity problem. Yet we think that our government gets it right in a very complicated thing such as a murder trial and thousands of them across the system. We think that very difficult decision they get right, but they get nothing else right.
Okay, I think we should move towards the audience unless you have something to add, particularly to add, right? So whoever gets the mic will then speak into it. And please tell us who you are.
I'm just thinking why you didn't show any
You have
footage.
to tell us who you are.
Oh, my name is Nakib. Why you didn't show any footage or photo of Ghulam Abbas in this documentary? Is there?
Good point. So we have some of his pictures outside. The trailer has a few photos of him. I'll add them on the last cut. It wasn't something I intentionally thought about. I think I was working on the subtitles last minute. It just, it passed. Yeah. We have 6 or 7 pictures. So we have pictures outside on the wall. So we've included his pictures.
But it's interesting because until you went and got those pictures, when we got his case, he was going to be executed within 72 or something hours. And we went looking for the records. But I know that we could never get pictures of him at PIMH. So this case briefing of his that we created, one of the ways we create interest around a case, we had an artist like draw out his face as a way to depict who he was.
But don't the prison authorities take mug shots?
They don't give them to defense attorneys or anybody outside.
So we did have a picture of him after his death, but we decided not to use it. So he was still shackled. We wanted to kind of show that, but we decided against it. We thought it would be, just not right. Yeah.
There's a question there.
Assalamu alaikum. Am I audible? Okay. This is Usman Altaf. I belong to one civil society. अच्छा, the thing is, मैं एक चीज़ के ऊपर थोड़ा सा यहाँ एक comment है. I should stand first. वो ये है कि especially people who made this documentary and have a very sound research background also, what the briefing is giving to the judiciary or people belonging to legislation. For example, if we say we as a Muslim, we do think that there's a life after death. So we want to get rid of the crime, say, okay, it will be punished there. For a person who don't belong to Muslim, they don't have a concept of life after death. So they said their suffering should be prolonged, so they should remain incarcerated or something. Any briefing is given, these judges do like this, what they say.
What do the judges say to us when we're before them in the court? When we argue for saying you should not be executing them?
What perception do you have of the judiciary?
So it depends, right? Judges are human beings and they have they're actually no different than any of us. They have the same biases and you can't get two of them to agree on anything either. So, they're no different than all of us in this room. And their opinions as varied. You'd have judges that would say, why do you want to prolong their suffering? You're not actually doing them a favor, right? And then the answer to that is always, my lord, I think we should ask the client, we should ask the prisoner if he wishes to die or to live. Because I've never come across anyone on death row, no matter, who wanted to die. Ever. It didn't matter if they'd been in prison for 20 years. It doesn't matter if prison is hell. It's the most fundamental human instinct is survival. So I've never come across anyone. Some judges, on the other hand, have a great sense of empathy, and they think that being empathetic means letting them die. Some judges are very proactive. They're enraged by it. And so they want to change the law, or they want to make sure that something like this doesn't happen. Some judges, they were there on the first Safia Bano bench, are really angry and embarrassed by the fact that the judiciary missed this evidence. Like, how could it have been missed? And it's like, well, it was never presented to you. Well, how? So that really rattles their mind about the system. But, they react differently.
There's a question here.
Sorry, some judges talk about the Islamic question, right? Islamic law, and that the only people that can intervene or convict or forgive are the walis of the victim, so the victim's heirs. And with them, I like arguing with before those judges the most, because Islamic law actually does provide a lot on the treatment of prisoners. And Islamic law was one of the first ones that recognized mental illness to be a mitigating circumstance. And Islamic law allows for, we don't have Islamic law in our criminal justice.
I'm sorry, I don't believe any of that.
Oh, that's okay. You don't have to.
There were no prisons.
Yeah.
At the time of the Prophet.
Yeah.
So how could there be something about the treatment of prisoners? There cannot be. There cannot be.
Okay.
There are no prisons in Islam.
Right. They don't allow
And
for prisons.
Yes.
That's
So how can there be laws about treating prisoners?
They're not laws,
it's
but
completely
they're-
off.
So the Prophet does, in a lot of his sayings, which is not the Quran, does talk about how you treat prisoners of war. And
Prisoners
that's
of
the
war
close-
is not the same as prisoners
Absolutely.
in jail.
Absolutely. So Islam actually does not advocate for prisons. And in fact, if you look at our own history in Pakistan and the evolution of prisons in Pakistan, you don't actually see mass prisons being built. Some of the first mass prisons that were built by the East India Company. We didn't have a history of it either.
There is no concept in Islam of either prisons or a standing army or a police.
Right.
So anything that the Maulvis say is pure extrapolation.
I agree.
It is something that they imagine, whereas there is not a shred of evidence. So
I think,
please
Doctor, you
never
should
use
read-
that argument. Never use that
I think
argument.
you should also read, it'll go towards you, the Federal Shariat Court's judgment, which is an
The
appellate
Federal
bench.
Shariat Court can have whatever opinion it likes,
So it has
but it has
it has a
no
good-
standing in history, no understanding of history.
Well, we can debate that.
Okay,
but
so
having
then
said
let's
that,
move to the next question.
But
Yes.
just to say, it's a very beautiful judgment on the treatment of persons in prison in Pakistan. So as far as an advocate that's trying to fight this fight in the courts and outside of the courts, I will use whatever tool goes in favor of arguing, right? So the Federal Shariat Court judgment actually speaks not about just Islam. It just talks about the state of Pakistan's prisons and the rights that those prisoners have in Pakistan. And it's a good one. It's not a bad one. It's actually a very beautiful one. And there's another recent one that a non-Shariat court judge did, which is Justice Manalla from the Islamabad High Court. He's come out with a very good judgment when he was at the chief of the Islamabad High Court that talks about the state's obligation towards its prisoners as well, which is a good one. So you should be reading it.
Okay, question?
Assalamu alaikum, ma'am. I want to ask that I was very much curious about a case called Abdul Basit case. And I was curious about the thing that when that person, he became paralyzed after he was in prison. He was kept in Central Jail, Faisalabad and all. But ma'am, the one aspect which I am confused about is that when he committed murder, he was a very normal human being. So what about it? The one murdered, his right to dignity, his right to murder life was also being violated. So what of that aspect?
How do you know about Basit's case? I'm really glad you do, actually, but I just want to know how you know it.
Ma'am, I'm a law student, so I have been studying some cases, and this particular case got my...
That's excellent.
my case.
Yeah, that's one of our cases. So the argument in Basit's case is not to do with mental illness. So the argument in Basit's case is we found him, again, when his warrant for execution had been issued in the 2015 set of executions that were taking place. And he was a paraplegic. So Abdul Basit is a gentleman who was in his 20s. He was working in the administration of a university. He was quite handsome, actually. And he had been accused of murdering the woman that he wanted to marry. He got into an altercation with the father or the uncle, the brother, and it resulted in murder. But when we found him, he was paralyzed from the waist down and not a shred of, what we uncovered. And that's because when he entered the prison, there was a riot in the prison within a year of him entering it. And the riot, there was because all the prisoners had revolted against this superintendent who was known to be incredibly harsh and tortured. So the superintendent was transferred, a new superintendent was brought in. Every time there's a new superintendent brought into the jail, the first thing he does is, they do a checkup of I know the Urdu word for it. I don't know the chapa, right? Like the chapa of the whole jail. So they do a cleanup operation, surprise operation. And they put a bunch of prisoners into the Kasuri Chakki, which is the solitary confinement. So he was thrown into solitary confinement, and then he was he contracted viral meningitis. And because he was in solitary, he was denied access to any medical help until they thought he passed out in a coma, and they thought he died. And they were shifting him when they realized that he was alive, and then they took him to a hospital, and he remained in a coma for 20 days, and he developed spinal atrophy. And this guy in his 30s, or like late 20s, who had just been in prison for a year, came out paralyzed from the waist down. And 16 years later, he's still lying on the floor of Central Jail, Faisalabad. And we can't get him off of death row. We've managed to stay his executions. They tried to hang him from a wheelchair, and we tried to stop that. And we didn't win at the Supreme Court, actually. We won later on. The Supreme Court said, yes, you can hang him with your wheelchair. So some judges react like that. The judge actually said, the top half will match his bottom half. Why are you trying to stop it? But we did manage to stop it. For him, the argument is that, an eye for an eye means an eye for an eye, but Basit has lost more than an eye. And even if you've been sentenced under our constitution and under our jurisprudence, you might have been sentenced, but until there is one breath left in your body, is how the Supreme Court says it, you still have other rights. And those rights can't be violated. So the question before Basit's case is, the country can't legally hang him because it would violate international human rights law. It would violate the Convention Against Torture. It would violate, all these other kind of obligations that we willingly signed up for. It would violate Basit's right to dignity under the Constitution of Pakistan as well. And there's no way you can hang him without it actually amounting to torture, which is outlawed in our own constitution and in our own law now. So,
should we take one last question?
Nausheen Nasir, educationist. I was just wondering, there was this piece in the documentary stating that Ghulam Abbas was at a mela in Firozpur and his brother was taken to jail. And the family, especially the mother, called him back so that Ghulam Abbas could be handed over to the police and the other brother could be taken out. Was it because he was mentally ill? So let the, disabled son replace the able son?
I think when we asked that question, the mother, she wasn't sure what had happened, but she just wanted her younger son released. So she said Ghulam Abbas had a tendency to get into fights. He was not at home that often, so she was worried about the situation. So she wasn't sure what had happened. So she called this man at Fatehjung and she asked him to send Ghulam Abbas so that the police could release the younger son. Yeah, that was the reason. Yeah, very strange.
Okay, one very last question. Okay, two.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Arisha and I'm a student of medicine and final year. I have a question that what are you guys doing about raising awareness in the general population so that victims like this can get help in time and cases like these can be prevented? What are you guys doing about it?
So after this, I guess this documentary is just one step in trying to raise public awareness. So we're also working on creating a toolkit. We'll be sending out that toolkit to schools, colleges, law schools, med schools to try to get dialogue started. So from my understanding, that's what I can do. Raise public awareness. For you to screen the documentary. It gives you all of the materials and all of it to organize a screening in your med school. And what we as JPP promise is that we will make sure either Namra, who represents these guys, myself, or Saalik, one of us will turn up. But we're going to count on you to actually hold the screening and we'll take part because that's how we want it to proliferate.
My name is Vijiha Komal. My name is Vijiha Komal, and I am a prison psychologist in Pakistan. I really want to know, sir rightfully pointed out about the blasphemy cases. I just want to mention that they really, really need our attention. Most of them are psychologically disturbed. If you are not working for them, I really want to ask you and everybody who is here that if anybody knows of any organization working for them, I think we need to connect.
Talk to us right after this, not in the live stream, but we'll point you in the right direction.
I know that.
And thank you for doing the work that you do. We'd want to meet you anyway outside. Which jail?
Currently, I'm in South Punjab.
So the Multan, like the Vihari jail, or?
No, around that. Yeah.
Oh, you want to keep it vague. Cool.
So, thank you very much for having. At future programs at the Black Hole, there's one practically every day, and of all different kinds, all different types: science, art, culture, music, everything. So, hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.